My heart has been warmed, blessed already this morning. Appreciated the worship time, the time when we could focus our thoughts, our voices in praise and thanksgiving, and the prayer time was meaningful as well. Just been blessed here to be part of this gathering, this event. So grateful to the Lord for His call on people's lives. Recognize also that He calls people in to do different things, and there is a coming together, each part doing what God has called, accomplishes things even beyond what we have intended. And my prayer is that this morning we will be blessed by the presence of Jesus. I am going to start with some of His words, and we think about peacemaking. This comes from probably our favorite sermon of Jesus, called the Sermon on the Mount, and the opening blessings that He gives, blessings that sometimes seem odd to us. If we were to go into State College, I guess that's where we are, and just find somebody walking and stop them and say, what would it take to make you just thoroughly overwhelmed with happiness, you would be so overwhelmed you could hardly contain yourself? What answers do you think we would get? I'm quite certain that we would not get people saying, if I could just be poor in spirit, or if I could mourn. But Jesus gives a blessing here, and the Greek word translated at the beginning of each of these blessings is a powerful word. It means, if you read the Amplified, it just gets almost carried away, just filled with overwhelming joy and blessed in spite of your circumstances. And just as you read down through the Beatitudes there in the Amplified Bible, you pause a while before you get to the blessing, to what is being blessed, because it's such a rich life, full of life satisfaction and so on. So one of these blessings is, blessed are the peacemakers. And it's followed, I think, significantly with, they will be called the children of God. Now, some translations say sons, but the idea is the offspring of God, the children of God. And I just want to say here at the beginning, God is the greatest peacemaker. And we learn much about peacemaking from Him. We could focus this on a variety of relationships. So God, as a peacemaker, has brought us to peace with Himself. He has reconciled us. He has brought us out of a condition of hostility and a condition of tension, and actually a great gulf between God and humans. God has bridged that through His Son Jesus and brought peace. Jesus Himself has become our peace, and we are brought back into relationship with God, life-giving relationship. So that's the great peacemaking work, which this organization is concerned about. All of God's children called to bring people to be ambassadors, to be reconcilers, bring people back into relationship with God. We could also think about the peacemaking that happens then when people come into relationship with God. And the amazing thing is that people come from very diverse, sometimes very hostile conditions, and they come into fellowship. And so Paul talks about that in Ephesians, others of his letters, where he talks about this dividing wall between the Jews and the Gentiles. And folks, the Apostle Paul himself, being such a zealous Jew, desiring to advance Judaism, he says, even beyond all his fellows, and and God brought him in and then sent him to the Gentiles. It's such a joy to see how God takes down the hostility and brings people together. I'm going to be not focusing on either of those as much as on when we are God's children, how do we live in peace? And so we come together, and God is doing a work in us, an amazing work in us, to make us like Jesus, but we're not all the way there yet. We're in the process of being, scriptural language is sanctified or brought into the likeness of Christ. We are in that process. There will be a time when we will be glorified, but we're not always very glorified now. We are sometimes in tension with each other. So I want to talk about that. I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts here in relation to peace, and then I want to think about conflict, and then think about resolving conflict. Here's a quote I got recently. I was reading an article. I think it came from Crossway maybe or somewhere. Anyway, the quote is, "We tend to understand peace as the absence of war or as calmness of spirit. But along with these ideas, especially the Hebrew word shalom carries a greater connotation of well-being, health, safety, prosperity, wholeness, and completeness." So we think about the shalom of God, which again brings us into completeness, into relationship with Him, but also in our relationships with others. So going on then, this article said, a peacemaker then is someone who works to restore what is broken or incomplete, especially in the context of relationships. As I mentioned, we're not always doing so well, and we're not always as sanctified as we ought to be, so we run into conflicts. I came across this challenging quote, actually quoted by Alexander Strauch in his book, Love. It's a book on, maybe it's there, yes, Leading with Love. He quotes a Jewish philosopher who says this, quite an indictment. He says, "I have often wondered that persons who make a boast of professing the Christian religion, namely love, joy, peace, temperance, and charity to all men, should quarrel with such rancorous animosity and display daily towards one another such bitter hatred, and this, rather than the virtues they claim, is the readiest criteria of their faith." I cringe when I hear somebody who is not a believer in Jesus talking about us in that way. Alexander Strauch says later in this same book, he says, Bible-believing churches that enjoy 95% agreement on all fundamental doctrinal issues will fight and divide over the most petty differences. One of the blessings that if I can pull us back from the morose and not so pretty picture, one of the blessings I find in an organization like this is seeing people come together from a variety of churches and even different names to our groups and so on, but joining together in the cause of Christ and just delight in that. I would like to take some time now to read verses. These are just verses from the New Testament on the subject of pursuing peace. And what I want you to note here is how significant, how much God urges us to live in peace, to actually pursue it, to not just hope that it is there, but actually to take efforts to live in peace. And so I'm going to read these, just allow the Holy Spirit to talk to your heart as you listen to the heart of God through His writers. Romans 12, first one, verse 18, Paul writing, if it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. And then in chapter 14, verse 19, same book, finally, brethren, farewell. Become complete. Be of good comfort. Be of one mind. Live in peace. And the God of love and peace will be with you. Writing to the Ephesians, chapter 4, verses 1 to 3, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long-suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. I just insert here that his wording here is to keep, actually is to preserve what is. And there is people who come together in Jesus, people who meet Jesus and yield their lives to Jesus and come to know him. There is an inherent work of the Holy Spirit in their hearts that causes them to be attracted to each other. Okay, this is stronger than the attraction of family. We talk about blood, how blood keeps us together, and family, and the hearts of fathers and hearts of the children, and the natural bonds that are there in family. Okay, but Jesus actually calls us to a greater. In comparison, he says, if you don't hate father or mother or even wife and children and your own life, you can't be my disciples. His idea is that we come together. Jesus chose family language, which in strong family cultures is the strongest bond. People actually stronger, more tied to their families than even in marriage. This was common in that time. Jesus calls us into family, and immediately there is a bond. You've experienced this. If you travel and you're in a foreign place, a strange place or whatever, in an airport or in a foreign country, and you meet a believer, what happens? Doesn't your heart leap? Isn't it just, oh, here's a brother, here's a sister, somebody in the family, in the eternal bonds. Paul says, keep it, preserve it, protect it. There's this normal coming together in the family of God. So that peace that is there. And you'll note that he lists a number of things that are important for that. The lowliness, the meekness, the gentleness, the long-suffering, the bearing with each other. 2 Timothy 2 and verses 22 to 25. Flee, well, he's talking to a young minister here, writing to this young minister, and he says, flee also youthful lust, but pursue, chase after righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. And then notice he says, but avoid foolish and ignorant disputes, knowing that they gender strife. And a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient in humility, correcting those who are in opposition. So again, it's in contrast to the quarreling that can come over trivia, over things that are not central and basic. The writer to the Hebrews, chapter 12, verses 14, 15, flee also pursue peace. There we are. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. We'll just note here that first word, pursue, is a very active word. It's a chase after peace. So again, the heart of God here with all people, but then a number of things that can pull us back or can keep us from peace. He names things like bitterness. And you'll note here that bitterness is harboring things in our hearts. These are attitudes that spring up. It's like a root growing underground. You meet a bitter person and they typically don't shake hands with you and say, by the way, I'm bitter. Okay. It's underneath, it's hidden, but it springs up and it brings trouble, and many are affected, many are defiled. Peter Then quoting from a psalm, he who would love life and see good days, let him refrain his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. Let him turn away from evil and do good. Let him seek peace and pursue it. So there's actually two verbs there centered around this heart desire of our Father, that we would live in peace. Seek peace, pursue it. I'm not going to read this text right now. I referred to it earlier. I will come back to it a little later. But Paul, writing to the Ephesians, says Jesus himself is our peace. And so we'll come back to that. I want to ask this question: what causes conflict? And I'm simply going to list a number of scriptures that identify the causes of conflict. Proverbs 13, verse 10, this familiar verse to us probably: only by pride comes contention. It's essentially singling it out as the primary cause of conflict. We think too much of ourselves. We trust too much in our own understanding. It's pride. We are protective of our image. We are jealous of others who may be advancing more than we are. 1 Corinthians 3, verses 1 to 4, Paul, writing to this young church, this church that hadn't grown very much in Jesus and were acting like children, and yet he admonishes them that they really should be advancing. They are still, he says, still acting like babies. The indication is that by this time they should have grown. So in these opening verses of 1 Corinthians 3, he puts his finger on the problem and he says, you're acting like men. Essentially what he's saying there is you're acting like people who don't have Jesus. You're acting like mere men, like anybody who lives in this world who doesn't know Jesus, and calls him. He says, your problem is that you are yet carnal. And that yet has this implication that they should have grown. And so when we are not growing spiritually, we are going to typically be creating conflict. I already looked at Hebrews 12, verses 14 to 16 there, 14 and 15, that root of bitterness is one of the things that causes conflict. I do want to insert here about bitterness. I mentioned that it's like a root. That's a very apt analogy. It's like a root underground. You don't see it, but it does spring up. The thing that can be troubling about bitterness is that it will sometimes spring up a little, somewhat distant from what a person is bitter about. Okay, sometimes you'll hear the bitterness right there. They're holding grudges. They're holding things against people. Sometimes they become embittered against God. Okay, things. I'm going through things, and this is not fair. The primary word that captures a spirit of bitterness is unfair. Okay, so life is unfair, situations are unfair, people are unfair, and they become embittered. It's fascinating that the New Testament word and the Old Testament word that are translated bitter, they both are taste words. Now, I've been using it as an analogy, but really, you know what something bitter flavored is? If I enjoy nuts, and I regularly eat nuts, all sorts of nuts. I really enjoy them, and but once in a while I get one that is bitter, and I don't know what happened to it, but it didn't mature right, or it got messed up somewhere along the way. And when you get something bitter in your mouth, what do you want to do? Get it out. I have made a quick trip to the wastebasket, okay, just to get rid of this bitter flavor, okay? We go through experiences where that's what we want to do. We just want to get rid of it. We just want out. It's very, very uncomfortable. Bitter experiences are going to be part of our lives. Jesus went through bitter experiences. Oh, you find this, if you want to do a study of bitterness, go through where it's used in people's experiences. Esau, when he was tricked about the birthright or about the blessing, he cried with a bitter cry. What he was experiencing was very bitter. Okay, but when we go through bitter experiences, experience things that are unfair from people, and we feel like even God is not being fair with us, we easily begin actually we have this bitter experience, and then it embitters our spirit, and it turns our spirit sour. And people around us don't find it pleasant to be with us because of that bitterness. So that's an issue, underlying issue for conflict. James 3, verses 14 to 16, he says, he's talking about the earthly wisdom. If you have bitter envying and strife in your heart, glory not, lie not against the truth. This wisdom is not from above. And so you've got this internal envying and strife in our hearts, and it results in ambition, selfish ambition. One of the translations says there, James says, glory not, lie not against the truth. This wisdom does not come from God. It's not from above. It's earthly, sensual, devilish. And then he goes on to describe the wonderful wisdom that is from God. But jealousy, envy, strife in our hearts. I ask you, as you look at these, consider your own interactions, your own relationships in your team, in your church, wherever you are from. Are you harboring things that will actually result in conflict? You can't have these things in your heart and not be in conflict. That's how they come out. We come out in struggles with others. And then James 4, the opening 4 verses, he talks about a love of pleasure. He says that from whence come wars and strife? Do they not come of your own lusts? You desire, you want things, and you bicker and you war with each other. So he talks about pleasure. He talks about friendship with the world. So those are just some thoughts on just recognizing some of the causes. So just a few reflections, some thoughts then on conflict. Different kinds of conflict call for different methods for peace. Now, in this talk, I am condensing a lot. There's a lot that could be expanded here. But if you look, who was it that talked about the stories of the Bible? Half the Bible is story, and you can usually find a story that matches your circumstance. That's one of the wonderful things about Scripture, these stories. But you find different conflicts in the Scripture, and all the ones that I had looked at, you could find examples. Haman was in conflict because of pride. Saul struggled because of envy and strife in his heart, and so on. Anyway, there's a lot of biblical examples, but sometimes there's conflict because of misunderstanding. So that's one kind of issue that we face sometimes. We haven't heard each other well, or somebody does something and we assume why they're doing it, and it creates conflict. The Old Testament story about the Israelites after they had gone into Canaan, remember there were 2.5 tribes that stayed on the one side of the river, the others crossed over, and when these 2.5 tribes, the men went back after about 5 years or so in conquering the land, they're going back, and they pause at the river. And suddenly they realize this river is a natural divide between us and our brothers. And what do? They say, well, we don't want our children to forget. So they built an altar there, an altar of remembrance. Their brothers back here saw this altar, and they become all upset because God said, there is a place that I will designate where my altar is, and you come bring your sacrifices there. You come there, you gather there to worship. And they say, what have these men done? They built another altar. And so they assume that this is an altar of division. Okay, and they brought their arms, and they came up against their brothers, and it was a really hot, volatile situation. I want to say this: if it's misunderstanding, then typically all that needs to happen is some good talk time. Okay, you talk, you listen, and you realize, oh, that's what this is about. And when these on the Westside, when they realized what the motivation was, said, oh, okay, well then you actually you built this because you want to preserve the oneness. And so they were united actually in their desires. Misunderstandings. There are times when there are differences over finances. You have the man coming to Jesus saying, Jesus, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Okay, there's financial struggles. In Corinth, they were struggling with some material things there, and Paul admonishes them. So there's that kind of conflict. There are doctrinal conflicts. There are sometimes personal preference conflicts. Sometimes there's conflict. We talked about this, and I think the last session I talked about it, where there's divergent of vision. And so you've got Barnabas wanting one thing and Paul with a vision for something else. That can be struggle. We call it personality clashes. There's that, and I don't like that term very well, honestly. I don't have time to go into this in depth, but I'm going to suggest that there's a difference between personality and character. It's been really helpful for me. God does not have standard personalities. He doesn't say that everybody should be talkative. Okay, you look at Jesus' disciples, and there were differences. There were talkative, there were quiet ones. Did any of your mind go to Peter when I said talkative? Here's the one that just spits it out. He's right there. And what I want you to note is that Jesus never attacked Peter's personality. He never said, Peter, you just talk too much. Okay? Now, he did rebuke Peter, and times when Peter said things that he shouldn't have said, okay? But he didn't attack the personality. When he rebuked him, he said something to the effect that you don't understand the ways of God here, okay? So he did rebuke him at times. Peter said things he shouldn't have said, but he didn't attack his personality. And so we don't have standard personalities, but we do have character standards. No matter if you are talkative or quiet, you're called to be loving, you are called to be faithful, you're called to integrity, you are called to character, okay? And it is, here's the thing, it is character. Maturing in character, which means becoming like Jesus, maturing in character is what makes our personality pleasing. When we are immature in character, then no matter what your personality, it's going to get on people's nerves some way or other, right? Okay, those personality traits. You take a talkative person who is not growing in the spirit, who is not mature, and they're irritating, right? Okay, always talking, and it's never profitable, or many times not profitable. You hear? The struggle is that maturing, and we need to, our vision should be to help each other grow. So just recognizing there are different kinds of conflict and different approaches to that. Conflict then also happens on different levels. On the surface, you can have a person who is critical. They're constantly bringing up the fault, pointing out faults in people. Underlying issue can be jealousy. I'm not saying it always is, but it can be jealousy. And so what you're looking at is exactly what Jesus said, that out of the heart the mouth speaks. And so many times in conflict, we will say things like, we've got such a communication problem. And, we just can't talk peaceably. Well, if we can't talk peaceably, then we don't really have a communication problem, typically. We've got a character problem, we've got a heart problem. And actually, we talk too effectively sometimes. Okay, it's not a communication problem. We are saying very accurately whatever we're thinking. Okay, but we've got a character problem. We've got this heart problem that needs to be dealt with. So it's out of the heart that the mouth speaks. Conflicts can detract from Jesus, can sidetrack us from our mission. And so we need to learn how to resolve conflicts. We need to gain the heart of God to be peacemakers. You need to follow scriptural guidance for making peace, not letting it just go on, not covering it over and letting it just rumble under the surface and having a superficial kind of peace where we really are not being open with each other, honest with each other, but actually dealing with it so that we can keep our focus on Jesus. And so now I would like to read for you the scriptures that I mentioned there earlier, Ephesians 3:14 to 16. For he himself is our peace. Insert here, I'm reading from the New King James. King James simply says, for he is our peace, but the Greek language actually is an intensive. It's actually a focus. He himself is our peace, who has made both one. Here he's talking about the peace that comes between Jew and Gentile. He's broken down the middle wall of separation, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, that is, the law of commandments contained in ordinance, so as to create in himself one new man from the two, thus making peace. And that he might reconcile them both to God in one body through the cross, thereby putting to death the enmity. And he came and preached peace to you who were afar off, that's us, Gentiles, you who were afar off, and to those who were near. For through him we both have access by one Spirit to the Father. It is a miracle of grace that God the context here, that God could bring Jews and Gentiles together and they love each other and they worship together. They worship the same Lord. But you get their eyes off of Jesus. You get their eyes on circumcision, for example, and they clash. They're struggling, okay? One of the most unfortunate things about ongoing, unresolved conflict between brothers and sisters in Jesus is that we get our eyes off of him. He himself is our peace. And so there are times when we need to come before the Lord and say, Lord, our biggest problem here is not this issue. Our biggest problem is we're not keeping our focus on you. He himself is our peace. So, fourth point, thinking about conflict here, is that ongoing, unresolved conflict drains vitality. People get tired and discouraged when conflict is unresolved, when it just keeps coming up, just won't quit. And so just recognizing that. That's why we need to learn to be peacemakers, why we need to learn how to resolve conflict. I'd like to think with you a little bit about avoiding conflict and recognize that there is a healthy avoiding and there's unhealthy avoiding, okay? So the healthy avoidance is avoiding unnecessary conflict. Okay, there are differences that we have that we simply say that's his way and it's not my way of doing things or whatever, and we overlook those things. It's unnecessary to conflict over these things. Now, I'm not saying that we never address things that aren't salvation, let's say like the circumcision that I mentioned earlier here. And unless it rises to that level, we're not going to address it. That's not what I'm saying. We actually need to bring different ideas, different methods sometimes in what we're doing, bring those differences and discuss them and work through them, but unnecessary conflict. So we have to ask ourselves, is it necessary? And I gave two things. This was in the question answer time when we're talking about teamwork. So I'll just mention them here again. Two things that I think about that help us to discern, is this necessary or unnecessary? One is, if we are struggling personally to the point that we are having difficulty relating to a person. I just give you an example. I had a man talk to me some time ago. He was a pastor, and he said, I love my team. And he said, there's one member of the team, he said, I love him, but he's always late. We can count on it that when we have a meeting, he's late, and he might say something, sorry, I'm a little late here. It might reference it or whatever. But regularly the team has to wait until he gets there to be able to go ahead. Well, he was asking, like, what do I do? I love this brother. I don't want to make him feel bad. And I said, it sounds though like you are struggling with it. Like it's a part of it's hindering your ability to interact well. And so that brings us to the second thing to think about here. Is it hindering others, and particularly the mission, the ministry, the work that we're doing? Is it a hindrance there? And so I helping this man to think about it, and I said, I think it'd be good for you to just have a frank talk with him. Just talk with him about the issue. Now, I want to recognize there are differences in personalities. Some people are hurry-up people, and if they are not there 5 minutes early, they're late. Okay, that's their way. And others who just when they get around to it, they get there. So there are differences in personality. But when we are working with others, we do have to think about how our actions affect others. So I encouraged him, have an honest talk with him. Ask him if there are ways that he could think about how he is affecting the team. And would there be things that he could do, even that this pastor could help him, support him in being able to be more timely. Now, I'm also going to insert here that there are cultural differences here, okay? We are in Western culture typically time conscious. We have our schedule. We need to follow it. I'm going to recognize that. Some of you would be in cultures where being 5 minutes late is actually early, okay? And that's fine. Cultural differences, learning to work with that. Tardiness is not my subject here. I'm just using an illustration, okay? So there are times when we need to learn how to engage. I remember one man who was in a culture like that, and I think they had agreed on 9 o'clock or whatever. Well, I don't know, it was 45 minutes late or whatever, and this man showed up, and he said, I thought we were going to meet at 9 o'clock. And he said, well, it's still not 10 o'clock, so it is 9 o'clock. And that was his explanation. Cultural differences, those are things that we'll have to work with. But my point is, there are some things that we overlook, but then there's unhealthy avoidance. And I'm going to give you examples of unhealthy, where you have people who refuse to talk, but they resent outcomes. So they might be in team meetings, for example, and they're in there, but they don't engage. They don't actually share their thoughts, but the way it goes, they end up complaining about it, not liking the direction, but actually not engaging. That's unhealthy avoidance. And then when a person just hints at or skirts the issue and expects people to understand. Again, I'm going to recognize there can be cultures involved in this kind of thing as well. So I'm not trying to use this, but I'm saying avoiding actually expressing honestly where we are, in getting input. I'm going to be working from a particular premise here in resolving conflict, that in a team, in a congregation, actually the voice of everyone is important to full understanding. I said this, I think, again, maybe in the question and answer, but God never invests all his wisdom in one person, on a team, in a church. It's why we need each other, okay? So his intention is that we are able to, so that's a premise that I'm kind of working from here. Smoothing over issues, smoothing over differences that result in no decision, or a decision simply by default. We don't have the commitment to each other to actually be honest and share giving our input, and the kind of trust that we will that input will be recognized, it'll be honored. Won't always go in the way of a particular person, but there are times when people smooth that over, those differences, but no decision is made, or it just kind of finally what happens, and just by default. Another unhealthy avoidance is being pleasant and agreeable, okay, being pleasant and agreeable, but then either ignoring direction or spouting off to others. So there are times when people in a time of conflict, they don't conflict. They're pleasant, they're agreeable, they seem to go along, but when it comes to actually following the decision, they kind of do their own thing. Okay, they haven't agreed to it, so they don't necessarily follow it, or they get somebody else, talk to somebody else, and how much they don't like this decision, but not being willing to actually share in the work. So I'm just saying that peacemaking does not mean avoiding conflict. So we need to face things. So thinking about some thoughts now about peace. I mentioned this first one, God is the greatest peacemaker. He has demonstrated, and I will insert here, think about God as a peacemaker. What did it cost God to reconcile us, to bring us to himself? If you are going to be a peacemaker, you need to be a person who's willing to accept pain. It'll sometimes be painful to make peace. Okay? It means sometimes laying down something that is very important to you personally. Another thought about peace. We demonstrate that we are God's children as we pursue peace. I already mentioned that. We are not called to make peace with everyone at any cost or on any terms. So when I emphasize making peace, being peacemakers, I am not saying that we can be at peace with evil. I am not saying that we can be at peace with the compromise of who Jesus is, of that he is Lord, or those important things. So peace with God, peace God's way does mean sacrifice. And so this does bring up something. I don't have time to go into this, but sometimes people are struggling with the issue of, but if I yield here, I'm compromising. This is what I stand on. I believe this is a conviction of mine, and so if I yield, I'm compromising. And this is one way. This is not the only way to differentiate between sacrifice and compromise, but it is one way. Sacrifice is giving up the lesser for the greater. And so I give up my personal interest for the good of the group. Is that making sense? That's giving up the lesser for the greater. I keep the mission in focus, and I give up something that I really would like to do because this is what this mission is about. Okay, I'm yielding the lesser for the greater. Okay, compromise is yielding the greater for the lesser. And this is why Paul would not back down on the issue of circumcision as necessary for salvation. He's saying we are actually making circumcision more important than the work of grace that has come through Jesus and his sacrifice. And he would not sacrifice that greater for the lesser. So that's, again, that won't solve all questions. Let's talk about what enables resolution now. How do we deal with, how do we resolve where there are differences, where there is conflict? So first of all, I think it's good for us, healthy for us to think about conflict resolution as an opportunity for growth. This is, I want to say here that I don't like conflict. Conflict can scare me. The ironic thing is that God has called me into a work that many times I'm involved in conflict resolution, working out conflicts between people, but I want to say here that many times conflict comes because a person has an idea, person A, person B has a differing idea, and they are both right. Okay? In order to find resolution, you actually have to consider both of those, but neither one is willing to listen to the other. Okay? Again, we often bring only one part of wisdom to a particular situation, and Actually, one of the things that happens when we're willing to work at conflict, have difficult meetings, sit down, be honest with each other, talk, share our hearts with each other. One of the things that will happen is that if we are following God's Holy Spirit, He will humble us. He will sometimes show us things about ourselves, things about the situation that we really did not understand. I said earlier that resolving needs this thing of bringing people together who have differing ideas. Let me just say again, on that point, I have come to meetings, sometimes members' meetings, brothers' meetings where we're going to talk about something, and especially if it's announced ahead of time, we need to talk about this, need to make this decision. I like to think about that ahead of time, and I like to prepare my heart and try to discern, pray about it, those kinds of things, to prepare for that. And often I have come to a meeting like that, and I think I've pretty much thought it through, and I know kind of where it ought to go. And then as I listen to my fellow believers around the circle, I often find that there were things I was not paying attention to. This person is saying something, I didn't think about that at all. That's God's intention. And that actually through this, we actually are able to grow personally and as a group. I'd also say that where we see, God shows us many times in conflict, He will show us things about ourselves if we're paying attention. Some of the things that I've had to learn, well, let me just say this. When you're involved in ministry, somehow, I don't know who arranges this, but there's typically going to be a favorite critic. There's going to be somebody who regularly lets you know what you're doing wrong. Okay, and sometimes we really like to squirm out of those kinds of interactions, but God has taught me things through critics, even times when it isn't coming nicely. Oftentimes when a critic comes, there is something that we need to pay attention to. And I've found that it's hard for me in the moment to see that. It's only if later I open myself to the Lord, He ends up talking and saying something. So it's opportunity for personal growth as well. We need to discern between what needs to be overlooked, what needs to be addressed. I've already talked about that. Go on to the third one here. We need to prioritize, in times of conflict, we need to prioritize talking to rather than talking about. Okay, so if you've got a conflict with a brother, you go to that brother. Okay, not talking about. Jesus taught us that, and he says, if your brother doesn't hear you, then you go and get somebody else. But the intention of getting others to join is not to get more support for your idea. It is to bring others in who can discern, help discern what's involved here. Is one right and one wrong? Are they both right? Or maybe both are wrong. Okay, but that bringing others is to help in that discernment. So prioritize talking to, and many times in being able to talking to, we can actually work that out. That does take courage. I want to say this. If you struggle with fearing talking to somebody, here's something that has helped me personally. When I struggle with fearing talking to somebody, I ask myself, am I committed to that person's good? Do I love, that really is what I'm asking, do I love that person? What does love look like? Do I love that person enough to talk to them, to address the issue and try to find resolution? So if you're struggling with courage in talking to a person, ask God to show you how to love them, what would be best in their best interest. And then listen to understand rather than to refute. James, again, quoted from him earlier, James 1:19. What does he say? Let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and then slow to wrath. And this is really good advice, kind of short little advice points there. Listen to understand. And so we listen. Here's a little tool that has helped me, a little tactic that has helped me. I try, if indifference, listen, ask questions until I can say what that person is saying in my own words, and they can say, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That helps us to know, it helps them to know we've listened, we've understood. Okay? You can do that even when you disagree with the person. Maybe especially when you disagree is important. Listen until. My tendency is to listen in order to refute. Okay? I'm paying attention to the places where they got it wrong. And I want to say this, usually a critic, when they come and give you a criticism, they typically don't know the whole situation. Okay? And our tendency is to try to correct that misunderstanding instead of listening to what they're saying. Okay? Again, listen to understand. Represent other people's viewpoints and their interactions accurately. So there are times when in our working on things, we are talking to the person, we're in conflict, and then we need to talk to somebody else about it. It might be a supervisor, you might be on a team, an advisory team, an administrative team, and you need to discuss something that has happened, or one of the workers or whatever. One of the marks of spiritual maturity is the ability to accurately reflect the other person's viewpoint. Accurately reflect what they said. I'm going to illustrate this. Pastors even have trouble with this sometimes. I remember a couple of stories. One, I was at a minister's meeting, and there were two bishops that kind of got into a tangle, and I don't remember what the issue was, but now I'm saying, folks, they were bishops, okay? So they're spiritual men. And both of these men were friends of mine. And later, one of them was talking to me. I wasn't involved in the conversation, but one of them was talking to me, and he was complaining about this other man. And he said he talks about listening a lot, but he wouldn't listen. He said he did 75% of the talking, And I didn't know what the issue was or whatever, but he was talking to me about it. And then later, I think it was the next day, I was talking to the other one, and I didn't try to get into this, but I suddenly realized he's talking about the same conversation, but it didn't sound the same as this other one. And I'm a little ornery sometimes. So I asked him, I said, are you saying he did more talking than you did? And he said, oh, he did 90% of the talking. Those percentages, now those are bishops giving those percentages. That does reveal something, though, about conflict. Just the higher the emotional level in a conflict, the more we hear what's coming toward us and we forget what goes from us. That's just a common thing that happens in this. Remember another man talking to me, he was complaining, these were pastors as well. One was complaining about the other, and he said, he called me a liar 3 times. He called me a liar. And later I was talking to the other one, and he said, he was talking about this thing. He said, I told him that's not true. Now, you hear the difference? Can we accurately represent, especially a person who differs with us? It's a test of character, and I always am grieved when I hear brothers and sisters actually misrepresenting those that they struggle with. Avoid explaining negative storylines. I am running out of time. All I'm saying here is, folks, we care about more than words and actions. You know what we care about? We care about why. We want to know where the heart is. What's really the heart? And then what we'll do is we will explain, this person did something wrong. Okay, we care about that heart, and we'll talk about why that person is that way. Do you hear the negative storyline? How they got that way. Those kinds of deductions and surmisings are typically destructive. They're going to add to conflict, not take away from conflict. Look at how Job's friends explained his storyline. We know why you're going through this, okay? And it's always hurtful when somebody explains our storyline wrongly, assumes to know things. We easily try to get into God's place here. Number 7, enabling resolution. In resolving past offenses, deal with actual words and actions, not perceptions. So again, this is close to what I was saying earlier here, but what did the person actually do? What did they say? Not just, again, we care about the heart, but when you are thinking about an interaction that you've had, a conflicting interaction, the emotion has gotten high, and then you come away and you just say, I don't think they like me. What have you done? You've talked about a perception. You've not talked about the issue, okay? Now, I'm not saying you don't have to address underlying issues. I'm saying, though, be careful about when you're dealing with these things, deal with the actual words and actions. I have a whole nother slide here, and I'm just going to show you what it is. What hinders resolution? Faulty memory is one. Versus faithful representation. Filling in the blanks, already talked about that. Here's something I want to say. In resolving conflict, sometimes we have to have open hands, which means that we won't try to explain why a person is that way. We don't always know what is in the heart. It looks like bitterness. It looks like pride. It looks like whatever it might look like to us. But we have to be careful there. We are not the judges. What did Jeremiah say? The heart is deceitful above all things, desperately wicked. You know what it says after that? Who can know it? I, the Lord. I test the heart. I try, the King James, the reins. It's the idea of the innermost being. Heart business, I'm saying we care about it, and we have to address it. We have to look at what's in the heart, but we have to be careful about becoming judges of other people's hearts. That's the point that I'm making here. Harboring offenses, just destructive to teamwork, ministry, forgiveness and forbearance. Fear is a hindrance to resolution. Love and trust. We trust people who we know love us. And we trust people who are the same when you talk to them as when they're away. There's not a difference between the exterior and the interior. We trust people who are true. Does that make sense? True. Remember Joseph's brothers when he confronted them and he said, "You're spies." What did they say? No, we are true men. What went through Joseph's heart? True. You trust people who are true. You trust people who love you. The hinders resolution, black and white, I'm right. We need black and white people, folks. Sorry, not face. I'm talking about people who can, slice down through everything and say, this is right, this is wrong. We need those kinds of people. I'm more of a nuanced people. My wife is more of a black and white, and it's wonderful. We've been blessed by this, the difference. I can sometimes working with somebody and I'm all bogged down and I don't know how, what else is going on there, and she can just say that he needs to grow up. That's clear, okay. Black and white people can really help us sometimes in those things. But she also recognized she needs me, my approach as well. But my point is sometimes people refuse to accept any other opinion or input in that can be a hindrance. But recognizing a limited perspective. I want to say again, folks, God does not invest all his wisdom in one person. We need our brothers and sisters. And that's a part of the resolution then. I want to bring you back to God, to Jesus' blessing. Blessed are the peacemakers. There is such joy in seeing those who were at odds come together, and we work together in union, in love. I'm going to turn it back to the moderator.